wish to recognize the Honorable Delmaud Ryan, Deputy Premier of Montserrat, colleague foreign ministers and other ministers of government from the region, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, our honored guest, Ms. Jessica Faeta, UN Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Bruno Puisat, UN resident coordinators and UN resident representatives from the region, Dr. Luz Longworth, Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the Open Campus of the University of the West Indies, and other representatives of the University of the West Indies present today, other specially invited guests, senior officials of the Government of Jamaica, senior officials of participating countries, our youth representatives present here today, members of the media, members of the diplomatic corps, as I meet your eyes across the room, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends all, in this partnership towards sustainable and inclusive development, good morning. I am delighted to warmly welcome you to Jamaica and to the Regional Conference on SDGs being held here at the regional headquarters, appropriately, the regional headquarters of the University of the West Indies. On behalf of the Government of Jamaica, I extend deep appreciation to the United Nations Development Programme, the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, and the Institute of Sustainable Development of the University of the West Indies in partnering with us, in hosting this important event. It has been 2 years since the international community adopted the new Global Development Agenda with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which seek to end poverty, fight inequality, and preserve and protect our environment. We are fully convinced that the SDGs, as the current blueprint for successfully pursuing human prosperity while respecting planetary boundaries, will provide all countries with the drive and focus to deliver on their developmental aspirations. This conference presents us here in the Caribbean with the opportunity to take stock of the progress we have made since the adoption of the SDGs and the challenges being experienced by our respective countries in attaining them. Evidence has shown that the most notable obstacles relate to data collection and analysis, as well as research-based policy formulation and implementation. Similarly, establishment of effective mechanisms for monitoring and evaluating development across the region has been an area of concern. We believe, however, that there is a growing momentum within our region to make good on the potential of the SDGs. Since the start of this year, several meetings have been held, including under the auspices of UN organizations, to explore the peculiarities of our region on the journey towards sustainable development. Our meeting at this juncture affords us a chance to consider the many issues involved and to forge partnerships with various stakeholders, local, regional, and international, to help us to address them. Over the years, we have witnessed firsthand, as a country and a region, the benefits of fostering strategic partnerships. I'm therefore pleased to see the broad range of participants, including members of the private sector, academia, youth, civil society, and other non-governmental organizations in this conference. We look forward to your active participation, which I'm certain will enrich the dialogue and identify creative and innovative ways to confront the challenges to implementation of the SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, while work has begun on the implementation of the Global Sustainable Development Goals, we are conscious of the severe constraints this imposes on us at the national level. In recent times, many of us have felt the adverse effects of a natural disaster. Only a few weeks ago, Jamaica experienced severe and repeated rain conditions, which led to major flooding across the island, causing widespread human suffering and damage to agriculture and infrastructure. This has highlighted in no uncertain terms our vulnerability to the effects of climate change and the increased cost to the country to rebuild lives and livelihoods. This recurrent diversion of resources from other increasingly critical areas is a major cause for concern as we seek to create an environment for the attainment of the SDGs. Ours is not a unique situation. and largely mirrors the realities of other small island developing states in particular. And it is in this context that we must support the calls for increased resources to address these urgent matters. It is an imperative that we seek new and innovative means of financing development at the domestic level, but also from sources beyond our own reach. In that regard, I particularly look forward to the discussions during the ministerial exchange, at which time the issues of financing and capacity building will be addressed directly. I'm encouraged that other critical issues affecting implementation of the SDGs are reflected in the agenda of the conference. And over the next 3 days, it is anticipated that from our dialogue on localizing the SDGs, concrete proposals will emerge to strengthen the science policy interface. Ladies and gentlemen, in our efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, let us recall the words of former Secretary General of the United Nations, which I think effectively top and tail the discussions to be had over the next 3 days. Mr. Ban Ki-moon said, "Ours can be the first generation to end poverty and the last generation to address climate change before it is too late." Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to our discussions this morning and thank you so much for the energy you have generated around our events over the next 3 days. Thank you. So the honor falls to me to chair our proceedings today, and my next responsibility will be to introduce and welcome the distinguished members of our head table. Our first speaker will be Mr. Bruno Puezat. Mr. Bruno Puezat, who is a French national, who was appointed UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative for Jamaica. He has held positions as an international civil servant over many years in Azerbaijan and Moldova, Kuwait, New York, Mongolia, Vietnam, Somalia, Bangladesh, Uganda, and Mali. Prior to his career with UNDP, Mr. Puezat was a teaching assistant at Harvard University and served with the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He took up his position in Jamaica fresh from a tour of duty in Morocco and joins us today to share his starting thoughts. Mr. Puezat, we welcome you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. As you listed my duty stations, I felt the weight of ages on my shoulders. Honorable Chairperson, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Jamaica, Senator, the Honorable Camilla Johnson-Smith, Honorable Ministers, other heads of delegations and representatives from countries from around the region, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Mona campus, Dr. Luz Longsworth, and other leaders of the university community, United Nations Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, Chair of the Regional United Nations Development Group for Latin America and the Caribbean, Ms. Jessica Fayeta, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General for the SDGs, Conference Advisor, former Minister of Social Affairs and Employment of the Netherlands and former United Nations Under-Secretary General and UNDP Associate Administrator, Mr. Adrianus Melkert, Excellencies, the ambassadors and heads of international organizations, members of the diplomatic corps, United Nations colleagues from across the Caribbean, representatives of governments, of civil society, youth, the private sector, the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all and to our foreign visitors. Welcome to Jamaica. In late 2030, in just 13 years' time, 193 nations, including all of the Caribbean, will be called on to submit their final reports on their progress in achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that make up the Global Agenda 2030. These 13 years will pass in a flash. So if we are to reach the goals, we must move now to lay the foundations for sustained, accelerated action on the Agenda 2030. Discussions to that effect started in May 2015 in the Caribbean Future Forum of Port of Spain, jointly organized by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, the University of the West Indies, and the UN. Building on this first encounter, the Caribbean Action 2030 conference offers an excellent opportunity for academics and policymakers from across the region to come together as co-investors in our common future. Our objective is to learn from each other's ideas, best practices, workable solutions, and resources, and to strengthen the regional platform for continuing cooperation that will speed up action within the limited time available until 2030. To capitalize on this opportunity, our discussions over the next 3 days must be focused, thoughtful, and deliberate, aiming to tease out strategies that will fast-track the visionary ambitions articulated in national development plans across this region. The United Nations in the Caribbean, the development agencies, funds, and programs of the United Nations in 18 English and Dutch-speaking countries in the region, on whose behalf I speak this morning, agree with our conference partners that the 4 thematic areas selected for our discussions hold much promise for success to that end. These themes are resource mobilization, capacity building for public policy and rule of law institutions, strengthening civil society engagement, and building the evidence base for policy. So why these 4 themes? The SDGs are ambitious, wide-ranging, and interdependent. So sufficient resources for their achievement in the small island developing states of this region will demand robust resource mobilization, including partnerships with the private sector. Institutional capacity is clearly crucial to policy implementation. Civil society engagement, including with the youth, who by 2030 will be steering SDG achievement, will generate grassroots and advocacy, activism, and bottom-up support in favor of change. And finally, a strong evidence base is required for policy to achieve maximum impact. A greater focus on these 4 cross-cutting critical areas would generate for the people of the Caribbean tangible benefits across the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of life, and for the region, considerable gains towards the SDGs by 2030. 20 United Nations development agencies, funds, and programs that work across those 18 Caribbean countries and territories have now joined forces to better help the region achieve Agenda 2030. Elaborated with our national partners, our coordinated response for the next 5 years, the United Nations Multi-Country Sustainable Development Framework in the Caribbean, channels the resources and technical expertise of the UN towards 4 pillars: an inclusive, equitable, and prosperous Caribbean, a healthy Caribbean, a safe, cohesive, and just Caribbean, and a sustainable and resilient Caribbean. These thematic areas are strategically aligned to the SDGs and will specifically address areas that are crucial across the Caribbean, such as education, social protection, and economic opportunities, universal access to equitable, quality health services and healthy nutrition, reform of security and justice institutions focusing on corruption, citizen security, and social cohesion, natural resources management and protection, sustainable use of terrestrial, coastal, and marine ecosystems, renewable energy systems, and inclusive and resilient societies. Achieving the SDGs will transform everyone's life, and everyone has a role to play in achieving the SDGs. Indeed, it will take everyone pulling together to secure these ambitious targets. That is why it was essential that this conference gather academics and policymakers, development partners and civil society, the private sector, and the media. And it was particularly important that the voices, the realities, the capacities of often marginalized populations, women, children, youth, older persons, persons with disabilities, vulnerable groups, are heard and reflected on in the search for solutions. In conclusion, let me express our gratitude to the 3 parties which have worked together to bring us here today. The government of Jamaica, with particular thanks to the Most Honorable Prime Minister, to our dynamic chair, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and to the Permanent Secretary and her team at the Ministry. The team at the University of the West Indies, and particularly the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Sciences, ably led by Professor Audrey Henry Lee, and my UN colleagues across the Caribbean, many of whom will be chairing discussion panels. UNDP played an essential support role, equally ably led by the UNDP Jamaica Deputy Resident Representative, Dr. Elsie Lawrence Shunoon. We're particularly grateful to all the participants for their continuing trust and support, particularly the ministers and other national delegates, whom I am delighted to welcome to Jamaica. Finally, among many, I must mention 3 individuals. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Senior Advisor to successive United Nations Secretaries General, who's played a central role in the international discussions around the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 and now around the SDGs. In these uncertain times for international cooperation, his is the voice of passion, conviction, optimism, and also reason. My boss, United Nations Assistant Secretary General, UNDP Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, and Chair of the Regional UN Development Group for Latin America and the Caribbean, Ms. Jessica Fayeta, who arrived from New York at 1 a.m. this morning, and will be landing back in New York at 1 a.m. tomorrow morning, but insisted on coming to support us. And our conference advisor, former Minister of Social Affairs and Employment of the Netherlands and former UN Undersecretaries General and UNDP Associate Administrator, Mr. Ad Melkert, who's been holding our hand in preparing this exceptional event. The United Nations in the Caribbean is convinced that while the SDGs are ambitious, they're achievable throughout this region within the remaining time frame. We look forward to the coming discussions in helping shape a lasting framework agreement for accelerated action at the regional and national levels, and we commit to the governments and the peoples of this region to continue supporting their efforts across the Caribbean to uphold the Global 2030 Agenda commitment to leave no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruno. That I think your words really set the right context for us to proceed with our other presentations this morning. Ambitious but achievable. This is the point. We have to remain focused. It now falls to me to welcome Dr. Luz Longworth, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the UWI Open Campus. Dr. Longworth has over 25 years of experience in both academia and business in Jamaica, the BVI, and Belize. As a senior administrator at the University of the West Indies, she has served in various posts at the Mona and Open campuses, including Director of the School of Continuing Studies, Director of the UWI Open Campus Country Sites, and as Director of the UWI Mona Western Jamaica Campus in Montego Bay. Dr. Longworth's research includes leadership development, change management, and organizational development and transformation. You understand why she's so important to our panel this morning. Dr. Longworth, I welcome you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I will start by recognizing you, Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Honorable Delmaud Ryan, Deputy Premier of Montserrat, distinguished ministers of government of our Caribbean countries, other officials, members of the Senate, Mr. Bruno Pueza, UN Resident Coordinator, Ms. Jessica Fayeta, Assistant Secretary General and Director of the UNDP Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean, members of the Diplomatic Corps, other distinguished representatives from the other countries of the Caribbean, UWI colleagues, particularly our hard-working team from Salisis, members of development agencies, our youth, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm good morning to you. I am here to bring apologies on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, who I believe is somewhere over the mid-Atlantic at this point in time, but one never is sure. He moves very quickly. And also on behalf of Professor Archibald MacDonald, the principal of the UWI Mona campus, who was carded to give this morning's remarks. But we have a very deep leadership team at the University of the West Indies, so if one falters, someone else can come and fill in at the last minute. So it is my sincere pleasure, on behalf of the University of the West Indies and the entire leadership, staff, and students, to welcome to this very distinguished group of policymakers, members of NGOs, academics, and other leaders who share one common purpose, and that is a laser-sharp focus on the Caribbean's achievement of all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And may I say that we perhaps are almost there in achieving the last one, because this morning we have, to quote Stephen Covey, we have begun with the end in mind, with Goal 17 speaking to partnerships for the goal. And this morning we are here to begin those partnerships. So let us at least congratulate ourselves for being on the road to achieving one of the goals. The University of the West Indies is extremely pleased to partner with the government of Jamaica, and we here thank our Honorable Prime Minister and welcome him in his absence to the University of the West Indies, to his alma mater, the United Nations, and other stakeholders for 3 extremely rich and packed days of discussion and action planning towards the full implementation of the SDGs by 2030. If I may be allowed to channel our Vice Chancellor a little bit, I crave your indulgence to historicize this moment of convergence that we are witnessing today. On Friday, July 3rd, 2015, almost 2 years ago, the UWI had the distinct honor of hosting then Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, at a Caribbean Youth Forum held at the UWI's Cave Hill campus, and I was very privileged to be present at that historic moment. And at that meeting, our then newly appointed Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary, articulated the university's activist mission and vision within the context of the introduction of the SDGs that were being finalized at that time. On that occasion, Sir Hilary asserted, and I quote, UWI's hosting of the event underscores the close collaborative ties between the 2 institutions and augurs well for future joint undertakings. He pointed to long-standing support and research funding which the UN has provided to the UWI through enterprises such as the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies and the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies. The engagement with our young people on that occasion with the Secretary General was entitled Caribbean Youth Speak, the World We Want post-2015. And here we are now really looking at the world we will have in 2030. It is therefore extremely satisfying to see that this projected collaboration and inclusion of our youth is being manifested in this week's Caribbean Action 2030 Regional Conference. Since the launch of the Sustainable Development Goals, the UWI has fashioned a new strategic plan within the frameworks of the SDGs as well as the CARICOM framework, guiding our ultimate vision of revitalizing Caribbean development through a AAA strategy, providing expanded access to education, aligning the University of the West Indies research and teaching to the developmental goals and needs of our countries, and being an agile institution that will capitalize on all opportunities to improve the region's growth prospects. The UWI, therefore, is pleased to join in this call to action, which brings together in this very appropriate location of the regional headquarters of the university all partners who can make a difference to the fulfillment of this ambitious Caribbean Action 2030 agenda. If the region is to achieve the goals and objectives set out in the SDG framework and to unleash social and economic development and growth in our region, our institutions must become activist, not just active. They must become activist and interventionists in all areas that affect the growth of our region. As one of the most established institutions of higher education.
If we could rise to welcome the Prime Minister.
Good morning, everyone.
So I will continue with your indulgence from where I left off. So if the region is to achieve the goals and objectives set out in the SDG framework and to unleash social and economic development and growth in our region, our institutions, I'm repeating this part for you, Prime Minister, because I know you like this one, must become not just active, but activists and interventionists in all areas that will accelerate innovation and growth in each and every one of our countries. For that reason, the UWI has embarked on a deliberate and very carefully crafted strategy to engage in the areas that will have the most impact on achieving the SDGs. It is no longer enough for the university to provide graduates who can support the agenda or to provide the research to support these issues. The UWI must now and is now becoming an active player, partnering with governments, regional and international organizations, and other institutions in areas that will move the needle on the key issues of economic and social growth, which will lead to just, peaceful, and prosperous societies. We have already inserted ourselves in issues that are of immediate and important concern to our countries, from the threat of the sargassum weed to our tourist industries, the Zika virus that threatened the health of the region, the implications of Brexit for economic development of the region, the issues of de-risking in the banking sector, and others. The creation of partnerships, which is why our Vice Chancellor is so peripatetic, on all continents to harness the possible expertise that we can pull into our region has led to the formation of the State University of New York UWI Center for Leadership and Sustainable Development in September 2016, where we had the pleasure of Ms. Faeta's presence. We have also formed joint centers in Africa, East Africa and South Africa, China, and we are well advanced in discussions with Europe and Latin America, where the UWI will have not just partnerships, but a presence in those continents. These partnerships are strategically placed to put together intellectual, human, and other resources in our joint efforts to successfully address each of the Sustainable Development Goals in the Caribbean. The UWI is uniquely placed in this region to enable and support the work of the United Nations in the region through our research, through student exchanges, program development, and importantly, through innovative partnerships on data and statistics for the implementation and monitoring of the Sustainable Development Goals in the Caribbean region. We therefore congratulate all the partners who have come together in this regional conference on their own commitment to working together, pooling our knowledge and other resources for the ultimate goal of building happy, peaceful, productive, and sustainable societies. The UWI is honored to be integral to this process, and we wish all participants and presenters an enriching and truly productive 3 days, out of which will come action and actionable plans that will be implemented as we begin the process of transforming our beloved Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Longworth. It's certainly gratifying to hear that the University of the West Indies, my alma mater as well, has determined that it is no longer sufficient to provide graduates and research, but it will be activist and interventionist and enter into strong partnerships, which it has already commenced doing with a view to achieving and playing a significant role in our achievement of the SDGs. Our next speaker, Ms. Jessica Faeta, was appointed United Nations Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Director for Latin America and the Caribbean in May 2014. Prior to that, She served as Deputy Assistant Administrator and Deputy Director for the same regional bureau since October 2012. Ms. Paeta has also worked as Senior Country Director in Haiti, leading the UNDP's recovery and reconstruction efforts in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. Over many years, she has worked in several capacities within the UN system, which are too many to list this morning. But it is our pleasure to have you here, Ms. Paeta, having heard that you arrived at 1 a.m. and will be leaving again at an uncivilized hour. It makes us appreciate your presence even more and what you have undertaken to join us. We welcome you. Join me, please, in welcoming Ms. Paeta.
Good morning, Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Senator, the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Jamaica, Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of West Indies, my colleague Bruno Puesat, the Resident Coordinator, Honorable Ministers of Government from across the Caribbean and other authorities, distinguished guests. I look forward to listening to all your speeches, and all the colleagues from the UN system that are here that have put a lot of effort into this conference, and many of the distinguished guests that we have. Good morning. Perhaps one of the most important part of my CV, to be very frank, is the fact that I have worked and lived in 4 countries in the Caribbean, and therefore I have a very strong commitment. I don't claim a full understanding because one can never understand all the Caribbean, but certainly that it's one more reason why I'm here this morning. And even though it's a very short, it's always for me a pleasure to be back here in Jamaica. I want to salute in particular the personal commitment of the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs in making this event a success. And I certainly welcome all the national delegations that have converged in this occasion in the beautiful city of Kingston. I am convinced that this conference, aptly branded Caribbean Action 2030, will encourage and facilitate accelerated action across the Caribbean region on the 17 goals, targets collectively developed and agreed upon by 193 countries in 2015. Thank you. Notwithstanding tremendous global development progress in the last decade, we know that the world is today shaken by deepening socioeconomic inequalities, exclusions, and also severe and chronic humanitarian crises and the universal growing threat of climate change, which remain pressing global challenges that demand transformative solutions. Yet, we have never collectively been more equipped to face these challenges. And the Agenda 2030 is our shared global strategy for ending poverty, for protecting the planet, and especially for ensuring that all people enjoy peace and prosperity, not only in this generation, but future ones, and is therefore equally relevant across the Caribbean region. Last year, UNDP published a Caribbean Human Development Report in which we identified some of the key issues for the Caribbean to be addressed in this SDG era. And let me quickly touch on 4 of these issues that hopefully will receive some of your attention during this meeting. The first issue is that of a broad, multidimensional agenda which challenges governments to leave no one behind and address the needs of the furthest behind first. For example, a report made the point that women, youth, the elderly, children, and indigenous people are the most vulnerable in the Caribbean society and are at higher risk of poverty, violence, low participation in political and social life, and exclusion in labor markets. We know that youth unemployment, for instance, ranges from 10 to 47% in this region. and that youth female unemployment rate is even higher, notwithstanding the fact that young women are performing better than young men in the education system, and I'm sure our friends from the university can attest to that. So addressing such issues require holistic, multidimensional, and targeted policies that address the structural barriers to creating employment in the Caribbean, including addressing the issue of slow economic growth. It, of course, also requires developing progressive social programs that addresses health, education, and economic needs of young women and men. A second issue is the challenge of making evidence-based decision-making in the region. We know that Caribbean is particularly challenged on the issue of data availability, access, and quality, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs already mentioned this. And building strong national statistical systems will be very important, not only for developing more targeted integrated policies, but will be critical for monitoring and reporting on progress achieved on the SDGs. The third issue is financing the SDGs. We know that the Caribbean is among the most heavily indebted regions in the world, with many governments having limited fiscal space to maneuver. This situation is further exacerbated when many countries have been classified as high-risk financial jurisdictions and compounded by limited access to concessional financing. For this reason, we have been working with CARICOM, OECD DAC, the World Bank, and other players to advocate for adjustment to graduation criteria that include indicators other than income alone, to enable small island development states to have better access to concessional resources. But equally important will be to provide support to the Caribbean to access existing financial resources such as the Global Climate Fund or other vertical funds. And the Caribbean states also need to make better use of domestic, public, and private resources as agreed under the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for Financing for Development. And in this context, I'm particularly heartened to see that resource mobilization is one of the areas of discussion at this conference. We know that there are no easy solutions for financing for the SDGs, but this is certainly a critical area of intervention in this region, which requires concerted and coordinated action. Our ECLAC colleagues have also been working to advance solutions and proposals to a high debt solution for the Caribbean, which, if left unresolved, will thwart the SID's sustainable development ambitions. So I also welcome the special discussion with the private sector about championing SDG financing and the benefits to be derived from engaging with the Agenda 2030. Finally, the issue of implementation. Already countries in the region, like many SIDs in other parts of the world, are constrained due to limited human, institutional, and technological capacities. The so-called implementation deficit requires urgent attention in this SDG area, which is much more all-encompassing and complex. This will require finding new ways of working and stronger partnerships, not only in government, but with the private sector, civil society, and the international community. In our Human Development Report, we also argued that public policy must be better target multidimensional progress. Indicators of well-being beyond income highlight people's inadequate access to essential services such as safe water, sanitation, and health, as well as citizen insecurity, crime and violence, unemployment, climate vulnerability, and widening income gaps, and the continuous immigration of talented Caribbeans. Underlying any response is the need, of course, to improve the Caribbean's trade infrastructure to better support business and attract foreign direct investments. So what is the UN system response to the SDGs? With only 13 years away, that is less than 3 legislative mandates in most of this region. Over the next 3 days, we hope that the deliberations will bring a sense of urgency and focus on the SDG-related actions that are needed to transform the Caribbean. The UN system remains a solid partner of the Caribbean nations as the region intensifies its efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. One tangible expression of this commitment is our recently approved multi-country sustainable development framework, which is our common programming instrument developed and signed this year with the full involvement of the Caribbean states, and which is fully aligned to the SDGs, the Samoa Pathway, and as well as the CARICOM and the OECS strategic plans. And we hope that this will guide the UN development cooperation with the Caribbean over the 4 years, aimed at achieving 4 key priorities which we have jointly identified with the governments. And these are: 1, an inclusive, equitable, and prosperous Caribbean; 2, a healthy Caribbean; 3, a safe, cohesive, and just Caribbean; and 4th, a sustainable and resilient Caribbean. This framework provides a commitment from the United Nations in this sub-region to work closer together to better support our member states. This conference starting today is one manifestation that we can achieve if we work together. The UN system is also placing at the service of the countries of the region our global network of human and financial resources to facilitate the strategic action on the SDGs. Particularly, we are offering our expertise in mainstreaming, accelerating, and developing policy. We call this the MAPS framework, towards landing the SDGs in the countries. The MAPS framework helps governments assess the alignment of national policies with the SDGs, and more importantly, outline clear strategies for accelerating implementation of the SDGs. UNDP, working closely with the UN system and at the invitation of government, has already undertaken 3 of these missions in the Caribbean so far, 1 in Jamaica, in Trinidad and Tobago, and Aruba, and we look forward to responding to the remaining requests from the Caribbean for similar missions this year to help the countries develop a SDG roadmap that can guide national efforts towards mainstreaming the SDG goals into national plans and identifying the interventions that have multiple dividends, hitting as many goals and targets as possible. So as you get down to the business of deliberating Caribbean Action 2030 over the next 3 years, your agenda will provide a solid foundation for energizing around the Agenda 2030. We hope it will also mark a new beginning for accelerated and visionary action leading the Caribbean towards the world we want, a world that leaves no one behind by 2030. Thank you very much, and best wishes for a very good conference.
Thank you so much, Ms. Faeta. Certainly, we welcome the Multi-Country Sustainable Development Framework as well as the MAPS framework, which are entirely timely and important in the partnership for implementation. And of course, I'm sure every country within the Caribbean that is represented here today, and those which are not, are grateful for the continued and increased partnership of the United Nations system with us in this road to the SDGs. I am committed to ending poverty in Jamaica in all its manifestations: poverty in spirit, poverty in thinking, poverty in living, poverty in the necessities of life. It is prosperity to time now. These are the words of the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, ON, MP, Prime Minister of Jamaica. Said in September 2015, a full year and some months before he ascended to his role as the 9th Prime Minister of Jamaica on February 25th, 2016. The Prime Minister has pledged to build real partnerships with the private sector, civil society, the diaspora, the opposition, and international partners in order to achieve a vision of shared prosperity for all Jamaicans through inclusive economic growth and meaningful job creation. This is a part of the vision of a man elected as Member of Parliament for the first time at the age of 25, hence his commitment to young people. Now in his fourth consecutive term as an MP, Mr. Holness remains committed to this very real implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in Jamaica. It is this vision and this commitment and these thoughts which he has held for quite some time, which make him our perfect keynote speaker this morning. Prime Minister, allow me to formally welcome you for joining us this morning and to welcome you to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for reminding me of those words. You know, I borrowed some of them from Professor Sachs. In fact, while I was a student here, not so long ago, I saw Professor Sachs address a similar conference here, and he said some words that are profoundly etched in my mind and would have literally framed my own political, economic, and social thought, and that is that poverty can be ended, the end of poverty. And I, maybe naively, but I like to think boldly, used it in a previous campaign, which we won't speak about. But then I refined it a little bit and added to...
Acknowledge the influence of Professor Sachs.
Well, there you go. I refined it a little and I added prosperity. And that seems to have done the trick. The Honorable Delmore Ryan, Deputy Premier of Montserrat, my own Minister of Foreign Affairs, Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Ministers of Government from the region, Ms. Jessica Faita, UN Assistant Secretary General, thanks for being here. I know you must have a blistering schedule, but we are appreciative of the fact that you have taken the time to be here. UN resident coordinators and UNDP residents, representatives from the region, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Professor Archibald MacDonald, Pro Vice Chancellor, and Principal of the University of the West Indies, specially invited guests, senior officials of participating countries, senior officials of the government of Jamaica, youth representatives, members of the media, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, be assured I did not leave anyone behind. I'm very pleased to be here at the opening of this important regional conference on the 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. This conference is timely and affords the opportunity for the Caribbean to take important decisions on the localization and implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The SDGs are aligned with key development concerns and priorities of the region. These include economic growth, equity, security and safety, good health, world-class education and training, good governance, innovation-driven societies, environmental sustainability and climate change response. Indeed, the goals are considered a game changer for global development and for advancing the sustainable prosperity of our islands and coastal states. Let us, for a moment, take a panoramic view of the Caribbean. What do we see? White and black sand beaches, fertile vegetation, tall and majestic mountains, and other wonderful and diverse landforms, such as the Blue and Drunkard Mountains right here in Jamaica. And for our visitors, if you have the time, please go and visit. The Pitch Lake in Trinidad, Harrison Caves in Barbados, and we could go on. We will also see hardworking and industrious people, filled with not just warmth, but creativity and talent. This, however, is only a piece of the picture. If we take a more microscopic view of the region, we will see some real challenges. Low levels of economic growth, high levels of debt and rising poverty, unemployment, unattached youth, the increasing incidence of lifestyle diseases, and of course, crime and violence. Additionally, our countries have other intrinsic economic, environmental, and social vulnerabilities due to size. These include limited natural resource base, significant competition for land use, dependence on major economic sector on the natural environment, fragile ecosystems, and a high concentration of people and infrastructure in coastal zones. Globally, fast technological progress and deepening globalization have created opportunities for some, but profound challenges for others, including for young people who struggle to find work. Many countries are being affected by severe natural disasters, and with climate change, we can expect worsening weather events. A significant number of countries are experiencing violent conflicts, causing loss of life, major development setbacks, and the displacement of people on a huge scale, which also impact us directly and indirectly. In this, the world that we now live in, we must ask ourselves, is this the world we want to see in 2030? I will certainly tell you that this is not the legacy I would want to leave behind. Allow me to share my vision of Jamaica, and indeed the entire region. By 2030, there should be a Caribbean in which all have access to world-class education and training. Do you agree with that? I'm not convinced. In 2030, the entire Caribbean should have healthcare and equal opportunities in safe and just societies that are underpinned by trust, love, respect, and tolerance. I also envision a Caribbean with healthy natural environments, lush vegetation and forests, clean air and water, technology-driven innovation, economic growth in various sectors, and the end of poverty, or stated otherwise, prosperity for all. As you would have observed, economic growth forms only a part of the picture, a part of the vision. We are conscious that for development to be sustainable, there must be focus on the social as well as the environmental dimensions. The SDGs are an important framework for reminding us of the interconnections that enable development to be sustainable. In framing the Caribbean we want, I would like to make specific reference to Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, and Goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Why does this matter? These goals are all-encompassing as they recognize that the achievement of the SDGs will depend on promoting sustained and inclusive economic growth and full and productive employment and decent work for all in peaceful and just societies. My fellow Caribbean citizens, I am sure that you agree with the vision I have put forward for the Caribbean in 2030. We know that achieving a sustainable future for all requires extensive work and commitment. Strong national policies that integrate the three pillars of development: economic, social, and environmental. In other words, agricultural policy, for example, must include economic, social, and environmental objectives and must be formulated in such a way that negative impacts on the environment are either minimized or eliminated. Then we must look at transformational leadership to ensure a coordinated and strategic approach. We must look at capacity building and adequate financing across all sectors. Monitoring and evaluation. That is the ability to know what we're doing and whether we're doing it right in order to take corrective action where necessary and to share best practices for continuous improvement. And of course, effective partnerships. Inclusive of public and private partnerships, civil society, academia, as well as our development partners. In Jamaica, through the Partnership Council, among other initiatives, we are ensuring that the opposition, private sector, unions, civil society, and academia are engaged in the dialogue. I am aware that as part of this regional conference, there will be a youth forum. I want to make a special appeal to the young people here. You have a critical role to play in the realization of the SDGs. As agents of change, bring your ideas, your knowledge, your technology, and your leadership to the table. The SDGs, given their universal application, afford each country a platform from which to make their developmental aspirations a reality. While I was still here at UWI, the UN Conference on Sustainable Development took place in 1994, I believe it was, in Rio de Janeiro. World leaders at that time committed to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Today, I am a part of that future generation. While there are evident advancements in technology, reduction in extreme poverty, higher standards of living, better policies, and more people-centered approaches to development, it is clear that there is much more that needs to be done. Whilst we all have logged on to the concept of sustainable development, infusion of the notion of integrating economic, social, and environmental issues into all aspects of development, we must ensure that this continues. The Sustainable Development Model, therefore, provides us with a more holistic approach to development to advance our societies and create the Caribbean we want to see. The SDGs were born out of a participatory approach to development for its effective implementation by all sectors of our society. I will at this juncture make specific reference to Jamaica's commitment to advancing the 2030 agenda. Through our National Development Plan, Vision 2030 Jamaica, which was promulgated in 2009, we have already embarked on the implementation of the SDGs. Vision 2030 is visionary, insightful, strategic, and practical, and was designed to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. And I have informally attached to it, retire in paradise. I hope the PIOJ formally adds that so that we incorporate our seniors. The implementation framework of Vision 2030, the medium-term socio-economic policy framework, or MTF, outlines the priority strategies and actions that are to be implemented every 3 years. In 2015, during the development of the third MTF, the global goals were aligned with the national goals and outcomes contained in Vision 2030. The UN mission in October 2016 to assess Jamaica's readiness to implement the SDGs concluded that Jamaica would do its best or will do its part in implementing the goals if it implemented Vision 2030. A new tagline under Vision 2030 Jamaica was created to better solidify the linkages between our vision and the SDGs. And that tagline is Vision 2030 Jamaica, advancing the implementation of the SDGs, leaving no one behind. I shared the experience of Jamaica so that as a region we can learn from each other as we take this collective journey. We must continue to work together to advance our development, adopt and adapt as necessary good practices, and develop partnerships for shared prosperity. I cannot overemphasize the importance of stakeholder engagement as we seek to make more inclusive decisions and build stronger partnerships with each other. The SDGs create a framework for strengthening consultation, participation, and partnership at all levels of society. In the words of the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. As we take the next steps, I want to share with you my commitment. First and foremost, as Prime Minister of Jamaica, I am taking a keen interest in the implementation of the SDGs and their alignment with Vision 2030. Earlier this week, the government received a progress report on the implementation process of the SDGs and the planning from the Planning Institute of Jamaica. And I must say, I'm not going to give tales out of cabinet, but from my observation, and Minister Johnson Smith can confirm, all the ministers were engaged and all sought to ask questions after. I was amazed. But every sector saw something in the development goals that would affect them. And they thoroughly interrogated the team from PIOJ. Granted, it was an all-female team, so that may have had something to do with it, but they were all engaged and they asked pertinent and searching questions. But after the team left, they also asked, how are we going to fund this? As you have mentioned, the fiscal constraints on all our countries is a binding one. But I'm confident that we are on the right track. we're paying close attention to implementation of the accelerators as recommended in the SDG roadmap for Jamaica. Some of these include strengthening the outreach efforts of social protection programs, expanding care services for children and the elderly, pursuing multidisciplinary non-communicable diseases prevention efforts, strengthening the judiciary and police systems, supporting MSMEs, strengthening the land use management system, building on disaster and climate risk management efforts, enhancing public awareness for the importance of the natural environment to socio-economic development. I've mentioned these accelerators for another reason. The progress of the implementation of these provides yet another opportunity for us to share with our Caribbean counterparts the lessons we have learned. We can also learn from you in those areas in which you are currently implementing strategies for attaining the SDGs. I applaud all who have participated in this process and the United Nations for taking the lead role to advance the prospect of achieving a sustainable future. I also wish to express my gratitude to the University of the West Indies for being our partner in the organizing of this event. For those who have traveled to Jamaica, please enjoy your stay and make sure you sample some of our sights, sounds, and tastes of the city of Kingston, one of the 47 creative cities designated by UNESCO. I wish for you a successful conference and look forward to the decisions that will emanate from Caribbean Action 2030. It was Mahatma Gandhi who said that one must care about the world one will not see. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And allow me to clarify that that all-female team speaks to the level of excellence of the team and their ability to engage a specific audience effectively. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for reminding us of the importance of transformational leadership, of capacity building, of monitoring and evaluation in order to ensure that we're doing the right things and doing them well. The importance of sharing best practices and of strategic partnerships, some of which are reflected here today. Thank you also for sharing the alignment of Jamaica's Vision 2030 with the Sustainable Development Goals and our medium-term economic framework, which again speaks to the necessary steps for realistic alignment of our policies, taking from the international to the national, which is exactly what we're here about today. So, Prime Minister, members of the head table, you have given us so many things to think about. I think it's a perfect time to invite the Arden Drummers to join us to share a little of the sounds, a few of the sounds of Jamaica before we wrap up this starting segment and again kick off the rest of our conference with, of course, the much-awaited presentation by Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Arden Drummers. No guesses why Kingston had to be one of the creative cities. Our young people are they're just awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have come to the close of this morning's opening ceremony. I want to thank all those who participated. Again, thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Ms. Faita, Dr. Longworth, Bruno Pueza. Thank you all for contributing so significantly to this morning's kickoff for the 3 days of discussion which we have ahead of us. I want to say thank you to all the young people, academics, members of the private sector, diplomatic corps, all of you who have come and given of your energy to place us in the right space this morning. We look forward to the sharing of best practices, to the further entrenchment of our partnerships and the development of new ways of doing things, taking us into the next phase, given that we only have 13 years and we've been reminded less than 3 legislative terms, I believe, Ms. Faita, to focus the political minds in the audience. We want to share with you again on the point of youth, the youth perspective as we draw to a close. It will be a fitting note for us to simply direct our attention to the screens where we will share in the Caribbean Action youth participation video, which will engage us for another 4 minutes.
The hopes, dreams, and aspirations of a new generation of Jamaicans who know what they want and are willing to work towards it. Yet, like in many countries worldwide, there are gaps between where the country is and where their people want it to be. The United Nations is the international organization founded in 1945 to create and maintain international order, peace, and security. It is an intergovernmental organization which, together with the funds programs, specialized agencies like the UNDP and other UN bodies that make up the UN family, work with governments and people of the world to implement numerous projects and programs to positively impact men, women, young people, and children. In the second half of the 20th century, the UN worked with the global community to design an ambitious global development program called the Millennium Development Goals. World leaders adopted these MDGs in the year 2000 at the Millennium Summit of the UN General Assembly. Great strides were made towards meeting these global objectives. By 2015, based on identified gaps of the MDGs, the world leaders came together to develop a more comprehensive and integrated set of goals. These adjusted targets are called the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Through the SDGs, the world is now working towards no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions. Partnerships for the goals. The UN's presence has been significant in the Caribbean. Like other small island developing states, or SIDS, the islands of the Caribbean have unique challenges. These affect their achieving desired levels of economic growth and sustainable development. Chief among the challenges affecting the Caribbean are high debt ratios and the nation-state's susceptibility to external shocks. In 2016, the UN worked with governments of the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean to design a coordinated response to the common challenges that the region faces. As a result of this consultative process, the Multi-Country Sustainable Development Framework, or the MSDF, was designed to guide the UN's interventions in the Caribbean countries, supporting achievement of their sustainable development goals. The MSDF is customized to address national priorities in each of the Caribbean countries in which it is implemented. A key population of this joint framework is the youth, as their development is seen as a priority in the Caribbean. Indeed, the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network's 2017 Youth Solutions Report indicates that the world has the largest generation of youth in history and showcased how 50 youth-led projects were contributing to solving the world's toughest problems. Caribbean youth have specific challenges that are being addressed through the MSDF. They also have clear opinions of what the term sustainable development means to them. To raise awareness, a regional webinar entitled Youth Perspectives on the SDGs was organized by the UWI's Office of Development to launch an SDG youth advocacy campaign in the Caribbean. The forum brought forth the relevance of sustainable development to a specific target group, young Caribbean nationals, and highlighted the kind of Caribbean these young people would like to see by 2030. Welcome to Jamaica,